Hey, thanks so much for picking up the SMG-30 and welcome to the starter guide. This is your first stop to learn kind of the basic features of the pack, how to use them, and yeah, we'll go over the basics, we'll kind of take a look at the file structure, and yeah, let's get started. So let's first discuss kind of adding the pack to a project. So I've gone ahead and created this project right here, SMG-30. This is a default first-person template with Unreal Engine 5.3. I've got my lovely pack here. We're just going to click Add to Project. I'm going to pick the SMG-30 pack and click Add to Project. This will then go through and download all 1.4 gigabytes. This is due to the high resolution textures. We'll talk about that later, and add it to your pack. Let's skip forward to when that's done. Now that the SMG-30 has been added to our project, we can go ahead and double click to open. So here we are inside of our project. Now that it's all loaded, let's take a look at what the SMG-30 has imported. If I hit Control Space to bring up the content drawer here, you'll notice a number of folders. Now, 5 of these are created default by Unreal Engine. The first person arms, FP weapon, level prototyping, and starter content all come with Unreal Engine. And you'll see the SMG-30 weapon pack here for us. If we open this folder, you'll find 2 new folders. There's a demo folder and the SMG-30 folder itself. Let's explore the demo folder first, because this lets us preload all of our assets. If we go in, we can see first person hands and demo map. Let's open demo map and open the demo map. The reason we're doing this is because this forces the engine to preload all of our textures and animations. This can kind of prevent like glitchiness and slowness when we go and open other assets. By default, this scene will be static. I'm just using the WASD keys to move around here while holding right click. But if we'd like to see all of our animations run, we can go up to the play bar here, click the 3 dots to change the play mode to simulate, and you'll see we can still move around, but all of our animations are playing here. So these are the combined animations of the player hands and the arms for things like equipping, reloading, sprinting, walking, etc. If you hit escape, we can stop that, and let's take a slightly deeper look at the folder. It's very simple really. We have the demo map itself and its build data, a material which is used to generate the floor, which is a simple texture coordinate material that generates these horizontal and vertical lines. And finally, we have this animation demo. Now what this does is it's essentially the little character that's used in this level to play the animations. This is really not important and is not designed at all to be used in your games. It simply runs when the simulation is run, and you can see it checks if there's a weapon animation. If not, we just play an animation on the hands, and if there is, we'll play an animation on both and loop back to the start, right? That applies to both. We have a delay, and it just loops back to the start and keeps looping this animation. The reason it's done like this is just to make sure that the 2 animations, the hand and weapon animation, are in sync. You shouldn't need to do any complex implementations like this when you go ahead, because likely for animations that require synchronization, you'll be playing them only once, such as a reload animation. I'm actually going to dock my content browser here and head back to our demo folder, and we're going to look into the first person hands. Now in first person hands, you'll see character, and then mesh, which holds the first person hands mesh, the textures, which are the textures created by Epic Games for the mannequin, the materials, which again, these are all created by Epic Games for the mannequin, and slightly more importantly for us, the blueprints section. Now this holds a number of post-process blueprints and things that will help us when we go retarget, things like this IK rig, which will be useful if you have other animations that you'd like to retarget to these hands, or vice versa, which is probably more common. When you have a set of hands already that look a little bit more realistic or fit your game a little bit more than this, that you would like to retarget SMG-30 animations to, this is one of the files that you'll be using to do that. So let's move over to the actual content of the SMG-30 pack, and that's in the SMG-30 directory. In here, you'll find a couple things, and they're quite obvious. The animations, the materials, the mesh, and the textures. Let's start with the animations. In here, you'll have your hand animations, which are broken up into 3 different types: the montages, the sequences, and the blend spaces. Blend spaces like walk and walk ADS, these will work outside. They're universal Unreal Engine blend spaces, but they work best with FPS Core. They're designed to be plug and play, basically. And we'll cover that in a separate video. This is the forward, the regular, non-ADS walk. And then we have all of our montages. Montages are supplied for the reload and reload, the empty reload and the regular reload, and the equip and unequip animations. Now, if you'd like to create a montage from any other animation, say, let's take this chamber animation. Let's say you want to create a montage from this animation. It's very simple. We're just going to right-click the animation. We're going to create anim montage, and boom. Now, I'm going to rename this Control-Shift-S to save all, and boom, very simple. We have our montage now that we can play over other animations. Inside the weapon folder, we have all of the animations for our weapon, such as this firing animation, which you'd use, whenever you fire the gun. If we go back out and back out again, we come to the materials folder. Now, the first thing you'll notice in here is the 2 base materials. Ideally, you don't want to be touching these unless you know what you're doing. These these should be commented. You can see we're applying emission, applying tint, and we have our basic normal and occlusion roughness parameters. These are the basic materials, and all of the stuff that you see here can be interacted with through material instances. You should only be changing these if you want to make global changes to every instance of the SMG-30 material, even if it has different textures throughout the whole project. If we go into the material instances folder, this is where you'll see the materials that you actually want to be using. And this is one of the reasons why we opened this map earlier, is because now we've actually loaded some of these in. So in here, we've already loaded, for example, the industrial 8K maps for this lovely model here. So in here, you'll have 5 different texture sets with 2 variations, the 4K. Haven't loaded the 4K, so it takes a little bit, but because we've loaded the 8K, that one is instant. Now, here you'll have a couple of properties. You'll have an override to the emissive strength. If I change this to a plane, you'll notice that we have this small little emissive segment here. If I close this and go to one of the weapons, you'll notice it's this little strip at the back of the sight here, right? And every weapon has a different color for it. And we can change the emission at will. If I hop up here and I slow the camera down, and this is the bare metal 8K. If I hop in here and we make this emissive really, really strong, save it, close it, you'll see that now the emissive on this this texture set here is really strong. And so we can change that. I'm going to reset that to default, which is 3. But you can tweak that if it's too distracting or you want it to be more visible. There's also a tint option here. So if I'd like to, and I'm thinking maybe my bare metal should be a little bluer, or let's say more purple in this case, I can tint the whole texture to a certain color. Again, if we save that and pop back out, you'll see we now have this actually surprisingly good looking purple gun. It's very glamorous, I like it. So in this way, it's more intended and designed for things like saturation tweaks. So for example, if I reset this, let's say I think this is too not saturated enough, I can tint it slightly downwards and maybe in the direction of a certain color. So let's maybe make it a little bit warmer. And so now I've got this slightly more saturated steel color on this gun. And that applies to all of our texture sets. So again, we're loading the 4K map here. And again, you can see some of these have preset tint parameters. So without the tint, it looks slightly yellower and a little bit too yellow for my liking, which is why it comes with a default tint applied. If you've made changes and you want to keep both, you can see there's a save sibling or save child instance here. There's these little buttons. So moving on to sights. Sights have a little bit more customization. You can see each of the weapons here has a slightly different sight, although those two are the same. And sights are driven by the default sight material. If we open, let's take the crosshair sight. Let's go through the parameters of the sights here. There's a more detailed video on making sights, which if it's out by now, should show up in the top little corner. So you should go there if you want to learn how to make your own sights. But for now, I'm just going to run through this very quickly. We have a couple parameters here. There's the opacity, which modifies this little back, I guess, the opacity of the glass that the sight is resting on. That's set to 0.4 by default. There's the scale of the sight, which allows us to increase or decrease the actual scale of the texture that we're applying. Again, I'm going to reset that to default. That's set to 1 by default. Then we have the emission strength. In this case, this sight's color is currently black, which is why we don't see any emission going on, but I'm going to leave that high. So when we get down here to the color, this is the color of the emission. You can see if I bump this up, we start getting that nice emissive glow in. If I save this and we go back out to our wooden model here, you can see we've now got this actually kind of cool looking glowing red sight. So I'm going to reset these back to their defaults here. But yeah, that's kind of the set the color value there actually. But yeah, that's a really quick overview of how these sight materials work if you'd like to get started with changing them around. Let's move on to discussing our textures. Now, you don't really need to be going in here except for one reason, and that's the file size that we mentioned earlier. If your game is, for example, targeted for mobile, or you just find yourself not needing 8K textures, you can go in here and delete the entire folder. Just knock that out. I'm not going to do it right now, but these are like, you can see the disk size is like 48 megabytes or something stupid like that. It's just a huge, huge file. And that's the big reason why the SMG-30 pack is a 1.4 gigabyte install, is because of all these super, super high resolution textures. I mean, you can see we can just zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and keep having detail. And that's great if you're building like high-end, you know, high fidelity PC games. There may be times when you just don't want that or don't need that. And you can see actually the limitation that we're running into here is the shadow resolution. It's rather not the resolution of the texture. So the other thing that maybe if you want to is add more site alphas to the sites folder if you want to stay organized and for some reason you're keeping things in the default directories, but we'll touch more on that in the site texture making video. Cool. Let's touch on the mesh folder. This is very straightforward. There's a physics asset, a skeletal mesh, and a skeleton. Mostly you're going to be interacting with the skeletal mesh. That's kind of it, really, unless you're doing some like pickups, and then maybe you'll be looking at the physics asset, which again is pretty simple and straightforward. And really, you don't need to be hopping into the skeleton very often. Potentially, what I will cover here is creating a muzzle socket, because plugins like FPS Core, and you know, when you start building your own gameplay, may also want a muzzle socket. So like a spot, like a specific location where you can spawn bullets from. So to add this to the SMG-30, because it's not added by default in order to not waste bones, we're going to right click the root bone, we're going to click add socket, and that's going to add a root socket. I'm going to rename this to muzzle socket. I'm going to press W or one of these three buttons up here to show the correct movement gizmo, and I'm just going to move the socket all the way up here. That looks pretty good to me. We can always come back and adjust this because I'm not 100% sure on the rotation of this if it's correct. but we can come back and adjust that later. It's very simple, you just click on it and move it around. Now that we've kind of gone through all of the assets that are included with the SMG-30 weapon pack, let's discuss how to actually get started with it. For this, I'm going to go to first person maps, first person map, and then I'm going to go to first person blueprints and the first person character blueprint. What this will let us do, I'm going to switch this to new editor. The editor here, when I hit play, what this will do is it will give us a basic movement controller with, you know, like a jump and movement keys. So let's get started by heading to the viewport. Now, the SMG-30 is designed to be attached to the first-person mesh. So I'm going to actually swap out this first-person mesh for the first-person hands included with the SMG-30. However, there's a difference here. It's very technical. It's called twist bones. We're not going to get into that now. What you need to know for now is that unless you're retargeting, you should be using the first-person hands included with FPS core. I'm also going to knock off the default animation blueprint just to none. And then we can go over here and rotate our hands 90 degrees. Okay, compile and save for good measure. And now let's add our SMG-30. I'm going to select the first person mesh. I'm going to click the add button here, and I'm going to add a skeletal mesh. This should show up as skeletal mesh right here, and I'm going to name mine SMG-30. Hit enter to save. I'm going to compile and save again just to be safe. And then over here where it's a skeletal mesh asset, I can select the SK SMG-30. You'll notice that that appears here, just kind of in the middle of nowhere, and that's fine. We're going to fix that right now. Where it says parent socket, you're going to click this little folder and search for IK_handgun. Now you'll see that that's kind of just over here in the middle of nowhere. Again, this should be fine. We're just going to reset the location of our gun to 0, 0, and you'll see that that now snaps to our hand. The reason that we're doing this is because the animations supplied with the SMG-30 use the IK gun bone to kind of lock the gun into place. We're also going to want to reset the rotation up here to 0. Now, if you remember, this looks a lot like the animations shown in the demo map, which means we're on the right track. To test this, let's select our hands, go over to where it says Use Animation Blueprint. We're going to switch that to Use Animation Asset. Where it says Asset to Play, I'm going to pick something with idle in the name. So let's go for AS SMG-30 idle. If I hit compile and save, you'll notice that now our player is holding the SMG-30 correctly. If we're able to like move around and everything, but this isn't really where we want our camera to be. To fix this, we're going to need to change one more thing, and that's the way that our actual camera is working. The way that the SMG-30 is designed is for the camera to sit at a certain bone, right? If you look inside here, if we open the first-person hands, you'll notice that if we scroll down, you can find a head bone, which is up here. And this is the bone that the SMG-30 is designed around. Ideally, we want the camera to be located at this head bone. So I'm going to take our first-person mesh and I'm going to move it down to attach it to the capsule component. Now we can freely move our camera. And now what I'm going to do is take the first-person camera and attach it to the first-person mesh. Now inside here, we can now select that same drop-down, search for head, click on head, once again reset our location and rotation, and now we're going to want to update so that the camera is facing the correct way. You'll know this because this little eyepiece will be facing upwards. Now if we compile and save, you can see that our animations are looking correct when we spawn in, but the way that our camera moves right now is not correct. Let's fix this. The reason this is happening is because our code in here, when we look up and down, you can see is adding controller yaw input to the camera. So let's go into here and let's deselect Use Pawn Control Rotation. Now if you compile and save, you'll notice that we can still look left and right, but we can't look up and down. To fix this and to regain full control, we need to add one more component, and this is called a spring arm. Now by default, because I had the first person mesh selected, that's added it underneath. We're going to drag that, add it to the capsule component, and then select our first person mesh and drag it on top of our spring arm. That's going to result in this, and that's because our spring arm has a default length of 300. We're going to go here and we're going to set that to 0. And now we can select, you see the same use pawn control rotation option here. We're going to click that to select it, hit compile, play, and you can see we can now move around perfectly as we did beforehand. There's one more thing I'm going to walk you through fixing, and that's the little clipping at the bottom there, right? The SMG-30, in order to look at its best, needs a slightly shorter clipping distance than what Unreal Engine provides by default. So I'm going to hit escape, Control-Shift-S to save all of the changes that we've done until now, and let's go take a look at those settings. To get there, I'm going to hit Edit, Project Settings, and then I can search up Clip, and you'll see we have a near clip plane. I'm going to set this to 1, hit Enter, and then close the window. For this to take effect, we're going to have to restart the editor and this project. So I'm going to close that, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S one more time, nothing's shown up, we can see all saved down here. I'm going to close it and reopen it, and I'll see you right back. Okay, welcome back. Now, with that set, if we hit play, you'll see all of our assets load in, the SMG-30 is looking great, and I can walk around just fine with these animations. Now, if I wanted this to look a little bit better, we're going to create a custom blueprint for this. I'm going to create this in our first person arms animations. I'm going to create a new animation blueprint. I'm going to use the first person hand skeleton that's provided with the SMG-30. I'm going to hit create. I'm just going to call this SMG-30 NMBP. Control-Shift-S to save, double click to open, and now I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to add a slot default slot. What this does is it allows us to play animation montages over top of this animation. I'm going to put that as the first node into my output pose. Then I'm going to Control-Shift-S to save, compile to compile, and for now I'm only going to set up regular walking animations. So I can go to the asset browser here, find blend space walk, drag that out, and put it in here. Now you'll notice that this needs a left, right, and forwards, backwards value. Let's talk about those real quick. Before we talk about those, you can see already as soon as I hit compile, an animation is playing here. You can see there's a basic animation playing. If our idle animation, this is because we have not actually set our animation blueprint back in our mesh. This is because we have not set our animation blueprint back in our player blueprint. So let's hit escape, Control-Shift-S, let's close that. Let's go back to content, first person, blueprints, BP FPS, BP first person character. And now over here in anim class for our first person mesh, instead of use animation asset, we're going to use animation blueprint, and we're going to select our SMG-30 NMBP. Then I'm going to hit compile. Now if I hit play, you'll notice we have a walking animation playing, and if I start walking, it's starting to look better and better, even if the walk speed is a little bit fast. If I hit escape now, I'm going to Control-Shift-S to save that. We can close this right back up, go back to our first person arms animations SMG-30 NMBP, and let's discuss the blend space walk. So the left, right, and forwards, backwards values in this blend space are designed to work with FPS Core out of the box. However, we can reproduce their functionality fairly easily in default Unreal Engine. I'm going to close out of this, and we're going to go back into our first person blueprints and first person character. what this is using is it's using the action value X and action value Y of our movement input as forward, backwards, left, and right inputs. So what we're going to do is I'm going to enlarge this space here. I'm going to drag select forwards, backwards, and move it across. Then I'm going to expand this space. I'm going to move across the add movement input. And just before we add movement input, I'm going to drag out of here and I'm going to promote this to a variable. We're going to move that up here, move it across triggered and across the add movement input. And I'm going to set this variable to left, right. And then we just need to hit this little I button over here to make it public and visible. Now I'm just going to neaten this up a little bit. We're going to add another little dot there, just make it look nice. And do the exact same thing for forwards, backwards, except obviously naming the variable forwards, backwards. So again, we're going to drag out of here. We're going to click the promote to variable. I'm going to call it here forward, backward. Again, we're going to, I can drag in there and drag in there. And just do a little bit of cleanup. And once again, we're going to hit the I there. Now that I've compiled that and I've grabbed the left, right, and forward, backwards values, we're going to Control-Shift-S to save. Go back into our animation blueprint. And this time, instead of the animation graph, we're going to go into the event graph. Now, out of our try get pawn owner, we're going to cast to BP first person character. I'm going to hit the Q to align those two nodes. And then I'm going to pull out of here and I'm going to type left, right. We're going to get left, right. And the same thing for forward, backward, get forward, backward. And I'm going to do the same thing there as I did, promote to variable, promote to variable. And now, inside of our animation blueprint, we have access to our left, right, and forward, backwards variables. So I'm going to drag those in here, hit compile. Now if I hit play, you can see our movement animation responds to the direction that I'm moving in. You can see that it kind of takes a little bit, and we can adjust that by going in here. And if we double click on the blend space, we can adjust the blend time for the horizontal and vertical axes. You can see smoothing time, smoothing time. So if you'd like this to be a little bit snappier, you can adjust those values. But now, when I'm standing still, I don't want this walk animation to be playing. So let's discuss how to add a little idle animation as well. So I'm going to go to my first person character and I'm just going to get velocity. So we need to find this node very quickly. That's the last one down here, transformation, get velocity. And then we're going to get the vector length of this. And then we're going to promote this again to a variable that I'm just going to call velocity. And add it on the back there. When I compile this, we can go in here. And now it's time to move out of this space. And we're going to add a state. With the state machine node. And I'm just going to call the state machine hit. Now we can replace our walk cycle with the state machine. I'm going to hit Control X to cut. I'm going to compile, go into our little state machine here, and I'm going to add one state, call it idle, and another state, I'm going to call it walk. If I double click inside the walk state, I can hit Control V to paste my walk blend space. And then I can hit compile and go back out. I'm going to just align these slightly better so that they don't annoy me. And then we can go into our idle and find our SMG-30 idle animation and pop that in there. I'm going to again hit compile and then go back out, and we need to now handle our transitions. First though, I'm going to drag out of like the little gray side here. You'll see it will turn white when you're hovering over the correct spot. To drag out and into, again, it needs to glow white, and we're going to create a transition back. So we want to move from idle to walk when our velocity, I'm going to drag that out, get velocity, then I'm going to do a greater than node, is greater than 0. And again, I'm going to plug that into can enter transition. We're going to do our little Q trick to smooth these out. Now if I compile, you'll see the warning will disappear, and we can transition from idle to walk. Now we just need to do that for the opposite side. I'm going to again drag out my velocity, hit get velocity, and I'm going to use the nearly equal function here. The reason I'm using nearly equal instead of actually equal is just to account for any random float point errors that the computer may make that may mean that our velocity is not exactly 0, even when it should be. It just helps prevent some visual glitches sometimes. Again, I'm going to say nearly equal to 0, return value, can enter transition, compile, and now if we hit play, you'll notice that when we're just standing still, our little idle animation will play, and when we start walking, we can start walking. One last thing I'm just going to do, just for completeness, is I'm going to slow our character down when walking just a little bit to make sure that that animation lines up a little bit better. I'm going to go back into our first-person blueprint, open our BP first-person character, go to character movement, and where we see walking, we find max walk speed. I'm going to move this to like 400. Hit compile, play, and I think that's much more reasonable for the speed of the animation. You can always, let's say we wanted to have this at 600, and we were feeling like our animation is a little bit slow for this movement speed, we can always speed up our animation. So I'm going to Control-Shift-S again. We're going to go into the SMG-30 folder, into SMG-30 animations, and into our hands. And for the time being, I'm only going to do this for the walk forward animation. You could of course do this for any other. You'll see the rate scale, so let's say 1.5. And hit save. And now if I hit Alt-P, you'll see the walking animation is sped up by a scale of 1.5, and now it feels much more in line with the actual speed of walking going on in the game. With that said, now a fully functional first-person character using an SMG-30 with a basic animation setup. You should now have an understanding of how to set up your character hierarchy so that the SMG-30 works best, and understand how to use SMG-30 animations and the whole folder structure associated with the project. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, or requests for future tutorials, you can either leave those down in the comments below, there's an email on the documentation website, or feel free to drop into our super friendly Discord community where I think anybody will be happy to help you out. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.